Prologue. Beta Site, P3X 224, March 2010. Alec Colson had been living on this planet for 6 years now. He had come here through the Stargate to hide from some nasty businessmen who wanted him dead. Back then, the planet had rough and untamed, except for a small camp of Quonset huts and tents that surrounded the gate. In the time since, the planet had been thoroughly charted and sampled. But the camp? Well, it was exactly as it was 6 years ago, and that the source of the argument he was currently witnessing between Colonel Frederick Jones and Dr. Nikita Aronov. Jones was the military commander of the base, while Aronov, a crack archaeologist, led the civilian side of things. Aronov wanted Jones to ask for better and larger housing, but the colonel was approaching his retirement, and he didn't want to rock the boat this close to finish line. The result was a shouting match between the two. It wasn't first time this had happened, and it always ended the same way, with Jones pulling rank and torpedoing the upgrades. This time was no different, and Aronov stormed off. Colson had been watching the exchange from the mess tent and shook his head. "I presume the work on the new targeting scanner is stuck again," a female voice suddenly said. Captain Jennifer Haley was the ranking military scientist. She led a small team of soldiers and airmen who were working on several projects. The most important of those projects, however, were here attempts to dial the 9th chevron. A Stargate could dial addresses of 7, 8, or 9 symbols, or chevrons long. A connection between 2 Stargates in the same galaxy was 7 symbols long. If you want to dial from one galaxy to another, you needed a 8-symbol address and an extra power source. Because dialing between galaxies required more power that the gate's default power source could provide. Said power source was located inside the dial home device, which was an alien pedestal with a control panel on top. The DHD's control panel was how you dialed the gate. And finally, there was one address that had 9 symbols. It required an insane amount of power and led to an alien spaceship called Destiny. Destiny had been built by the same people who had invented the Stargates, and thanks to some trouble with a group of smugglers called the Lucian Alliance, over 80 people were stranded there. Haley's team was one of several working on a way to get to the ship and rescue those people. Alas, from the look on her face, it was not going well. "What makes you think I'm stuck?" Colson said. "You're peeling potatoes," he was. "You always peel potatoes when you're stuck." That's the problem of being on the base, with the least funding and the least imaginative CO in the program. Earth had several off-world outposts. Of those, the Beta Site was considered the least important. This was because it was the backup of the Alpha Site, which was the backup of Stargate Command back on Earth. Haley sat down next to him, took out a knife, and joined him in peeling. The base had 60 people, so there were plenty of potatoes to peel. Well, Project 9, that was the code name of her efforts, is not going anywhere either. "What were you trying to do?" Colson was an engineer. A good one. Alas, Colonel Jones, the paranoid bugger, had forbidden him from working on Project 9. "Design a capacitor," Haley began. "I figured that would allow us to make regular supply drops without having to find a new power source, but without better computers and equipment, it isn't going forward. Were Nick and Jones at it again?" "Yes." Before they could continue their conversation, the Stargate activated. Colson looked at his watch and frowned. Once a week on Friday at 1600 hours Earth dialed the Beta Site. All their reports for the week were then transmitted home. But today was Wednesday, and it was 12:17. So this was not a good sign. Suddenly, 2 people walked out of the wormhole. "Tilda, oh, brother, this is not good." Tilda Colson's mind flashed as he recognized President Henry Hayes and General Jonathan Jack O'Neill. The brass had apparently decided to pull an unannounced inspection. "Tilda, there's going to be fireworks," Tilda Colson thought. Then he went to greet their 2 visitors. Beta Site a week later. There had indeed been fireworks. Jones had ended up reassigned to a desk at the Pentagon, while his second-in-command had been promoted to base CO. Captain Klaus Anders had served on Atlantis from the start of the expedition until 2007. He had never been at the heart of things, but he had done his job well. So he had been promoted to his post on the beta site. And now that he was in command of the place, he had some major changes in mind. To begin with, he had reassigned Colson to Project 9 and arranged for the targeting scanner project to be moved to the Gamma site. Then he had taken a critical look at the budget for beta site maintenance. It had revealed that the budget was indeed no river of money. But Colonel Jones had been so cheap during his command that there was a small lake of funds, and Anders was now draining that lake. The beta site was located in a flat clearing. They got her water from a small stream, which 200 meters to the west. But during the rainy season, that small stream turned to a raging river. And about 700 meters to the north of the base, that river had cut a passage through a large mountain. What made that so interesting was that it wasn't just a central passage, but also several side chambers. And Anders was using their budget to turn the central passage into a sealed pipe. Once that was done, they would be free to move the base into those side chambers. But before they did that, Aronov wanted to check them for artifacts. So now Aronov, Colson, and Haley were exploring the side chambers together. "You do know that we haven't found a single artifact on this planet," Haley began. "Ever." "I know, but Colonel Jones never allowed us to explore a single cave," Aronov said. "Ever. We scanned them." "That's not the same, and you know it." Up until now, the chambers had been domes, which had been connected by narrow passages. But as they had spoken, they had walked into a square space. The whole thing felt very unnatural. Aronov's green eyes went wide as he took in the place. He simply couldn't believe it. This led to him not looking where he was going. In the middle of chamber was a round slab of stone. He wandered onto it. There was a soft hum, followed by a flash. When it faded away, Aronov was gone. "Nick," Colson said. "That was a transporter." Colson ran onto the slab, followed by Haley. The hum was heard again, and they dissolved in the transporter beam. When it faded, they were in a dark chamber. As their eyes adjusted, they spotted a crack of light. Haley took out a flashlight and turned it on. The crack was between a set of doors. The doors appeared to be ancient. The ancients were the race who had invented the Stargates and built destiny. As they approached the doors, they slowly slid open. Beyond them was a balcony where Aronov was taking in a view. "Nick, are you okay?" Colson said. "I'm fine," Aronov said, "but you should see this." The two of them joined Aronov at the balcony. Colson let out a whistle. Beyond the balcony was a massive cave, and in that cave, apparently in pristine condition, sat a city, an ancient city. Ancient city, 2 months later. Millions of years ago, the ancients had built a city called Atlantis. But Atlantis was not just a city, it was also a spaceship. What the ancients had done with that ship was a long story, but that didn't matter to Aronov. What did matter was that before they had built a full-sized flying city, the ancients needed to figure it all out. So they had begun with building a flying tower. The first one had been only 5 floors, the next 7, the one after that 9, and so on. And the cave was where the ancients had stored all those prototypes. But that was not the end of story, because these towers were not exactly the same as those that made up Atlantis. Before settling on a final style and systems package, the ancients had experimented. So when they had been built, some towers had lacked some stuff, while others had things not found in the final product. And Tower 7, the last one before the ancients, had come with repair nanoprobes, which were tiny repairs robots. In fact, they were so small that you couldn't even see them with the naked eye. The ancients had not used them on Atlantis because they were too slow and too difficult to program. But when they had abandoned the prototype and shut everything, they had made mistake. They had missed some of the nanites. The tiny robots had set to work. bringing the rest of their brethren back online and maintaining the towers. This was why the towers were still around. There was no doubt in Aronov's mind that without them, the prototypes would have collapsed into dust long ago. At the moment, however, he was more interested with exploring the towers. They're mostly empty shells. He noticed as he and Major Anders opened up a room. A couple of full established rooms to run diagnostics, control the experiments, and live in. So they are not very useful. No, really, Aronov said. They're not meant for permanent habitation. We found 1 or 2 labs that were used for long-term research, but nothing big. The room they were in now was a lobby, which led to a balcony and another room. Aronov opened the room. What he saw inside made him gasp. The room was a lab, and in the rear of the lab was a stasis tube. He had seen ancient stasis tubes, but this one was nothing like those designs. And it was active. Anders saw the tube and asked the one question that mattered. How the hell did he get in there? One back then. Philippi Street, 12 BC, Centurion Marcus Valerius grinned as he walked towards his father's house. His sister Octavia was chasing his nephew Gaius the Younger. He figured the boy was supposed to go do his studies, but rather wanted to play. Marcus had been like that at his age, but his mother would always catch him and drag him along. As he entered the house and gave his cloak to one of the house slaves, Octavia nabbed the little rascal and took him away. "Father, I am home." Gaius Valerius the elder was in the garden, but came at the sound of his son. He was an older man with gray hair and sharp blue eyes. In his young days, he had been a soldier. He had never climbed the ranks because of his inability to read and write. But because he had been smart with his spoils, he had amassed a small fortune. And when he had been allowed to retire after Battle of Philippi, 30 years ago, had been able to buy his family a house. 2 weeks later, Marcus had been born, and a year after that, Octavia had joined the family. "My son, the centurion," Gaius said with a huge smile. "I am proud of you, my boy." "You and mother taught me well," Marcus said. "Speaking of which, she's in the kitchen, preparing the evening meal." Marcus went into the kitchen. Attica Valerius and 2 of the house slaves were working. When she saw him in his armor, his mother grinned. How she had ever ended up married to his father was still a mystery to Marcus. As a young girl, his mother had been sent by her parents to work as a servant for one of the richer families in Rome. She had used the opportunity to sneak into the house library to try to figure out reading and writing. One day, she had been caught by the owner of the house. Instead of punishing her, the man had given her lessons. She had passed that knowledge on to Marcus, while his father had taught him everything he knew about soldiering. Armed with these skills, he had joined the army and made his way up the ranks. Until today, he had been made centurion. "So, did they give you good troops?" "I got 72 men, fresh out of training." "Sounds like you have a great deal of work ahead you, my son." "Yes, I do." Suddenly, there was a ruckus outside. Marcus and Attica left the kitchen to find one of their female slaves in tears. After his retirement from the army, his father had used the money that had not gone into the house to buy several slaves. By clever trading and the grace of the gods, he had increased his fortune to the point where the Valerius family could own and maintain 4 slaves, 2 women and 2 men. The gods had then blessed the slaves with 7 children. The female slave was crying because her youngest Antonius had fallen down a well. Marcus did not waste any time. He removed his armor and helmet as he made his way to the well. When he got there, it was clear what had happened. A piece of the well had collapsed, taking the boy with it. Cursed Nero. Nero Gaius Octavius was the governor of the town. He was extremely cheap on town maintenance. Had he not been so, the well would have not collapsed. Marcus carefully climbed down the well. When he reached the bottom, he found the boy. He was in bad shape. Marcus gently picked him up. With the boy on his back, he navigated his way back to the surface. When he got there, a crowd was waiting. 2 men, clearly doctors from their attire, took the boy from his and spirited him away in the direction of the Valerius home. While the crowd talked and gossiped, Marcus collected his helmet and armor and headed home. He not rescued the boy for glory, but simply because it had been the right thing to do. He heard some people complain about him saving a slave. It made anger flare in his chest. Vile, arrogant fools. Marcus knew that they had been blessed by the gods. If they wished it so, they could have made the Roman the slaves of the Greeks, instead of the other way around. So Marcus always treated the house slaves well. When he walked into the house, the doctors were busy treating the boy. Gaius the elder had assured them he would pay the bill. "Well done, Marcus," his father said. "Thank you, father." He washed his hands in a bowl of water at the door. "Will he make it? These Greeks doctors know what they are doing, unlike that arrogant fool Magnus." Dr. Magnus was the ranking Roman healer for the town. Gaius the elder did not consider him competent. "I think he stands a fair chance." "Good." Marcus dried his hands. "I will be in my room sleeping." His father nodded. Marcus made his way to his room and lay down on his bed. Between the promotion and the rescue, he was exhausted. Soon, his mother would wake him for the evening meal and everything would be fine again, or so Marcus thought. 2 Awakening. Tower 7 Stasis Lab, 29 May 2010. What Marcus didn't know was that he had never left the well. Instead, he and the boy had been teleported by an ancient device buried deep underneath the town. It had relayed them to another, which had sent them further along until they had reached Tower 7. There, they had been put inside a pair of stasis chambers. That had been over 2,000 years ago. Aronov stood next to the stasis chambers. They had discovered the second chamber containing young Antonius further into Tower 7. He had managed to access the logs for the chambers and realized that neither the centurion or the boy had aged a day. When he figured out why, he whistled. The pods have frozen them in time. Colson and Haley were at the room's main control panel. "We're going to have to be careful," Haley said. "If we get it wrong, they are going to age into dust." "I think we should take the diver approach," Colson began, "slowly reducing the power as we go." He punched up a screen. "There is an automated program for the job, but this thing was designed for ancients, so we put the function on manual and reduce it slower than the program's schedule." It was at this point that Major Klaus Anders entered the room. "How are things going?" he said. "Are we ready to thaw our 2 ancient icicles?" His voice grew serious. "And what about the psychological shock? We're going to tell them that over 2,000 years have passed. We're talking a major transition here." "Yeah, I have an idea or two about that," Aronov said. "For now, however, let's deal with the physical." "Do it," Anders said, "but I want Doc H and a full medical team in place before we dial power down 1 volt. Dr. Julia Henderson was the Beta site's chief medical officer. She was a top-notch doctor from New Zealand. "We're not taking any chances." "You're the boss," Aronov said. Aronov took out his radio and began setting it up. Beta site tent 29 May 2010, 3 hours later. Marcus was asleep on his bed. Then he heard something and his eyes snapped open. What the? His mind flashed as he realized that he was no longer in his room. In fact, this place was unlike any place he had ever seen. It was a tent, but not of any fabric he knew of. His bed was crude woodwork, but the mattress was odd. As were the sheets. The place was lit by several oil lamps. He examined himself and found that he was wearing a simple white t-shirt and a pair of pants which stopped at his knees. His uniform was on a nearby chair. "Where am I?" He got to his feet. His legs were stiff but operational. He made his way to the exit of the tent. Marcus stepped outside and gasped, because he was seeing something impossible. There were 2 suns in the sky. "No," he shook his head. "That cannot be." But it was. His head swam. He closed his eyes and took several deep breaths. What he was seeing could not be, yet it was. He opened his eyes and made his way into the tent. Marcus found his sword next to his uniform. He picked it up and went back outside. Looking around, he realized that his tent was part of some kind of military camp. His sword at the ready, he made his way to the center. "Where am I?" he muttered. "What is this place?" It was at this time that people came out of the tents. They all wore the same clothing, which Marcus figured was an uniform, and were carrying some kind of devices. And from the way they were carrying them, he figured these devices were some sort of weapons. They were yelling him in a language he did not understand. It wasn't Greek or Latin. They pointed the devices at him. Stay calm, Marcus. He studied the group. There were 11 of them. They were a mix of men and women. Some were white, others were Nubian, and some had a color of skin Marcus had never seen before. Suddenly, another man came from one of the tents. He said something to the group, and they lowered their weapons. Then he looked at Marcus. He spoke Latin with a thick accent, but it was clear enough to understand. "Greetings, Centurion Valerius. I am Tribune Anders," he began. "Put your sword away and follow me. I have a lot to tell you." He had no idea what else to do, so he lowered his sword and followed the man. The tribune led him towards a large tent. Inside was a large collection of tables and benches. Anders sat on one of the benches and gestured for him to sit across from him, which he did. "Tribune," Marcus began, "where am I? The sky it is." "Impossible," Anders said with a smile. "Centurion, I have a lot to tell you, and you will consider most of it impossible." Marcus leaned on the table and listened as the tribune told him of impossible things. Beta Site Valerius Tent, 3 June 2010, 0800. After the tribune had finished, Marcus had returned to his tent. It was as if his head refused to accept what he had been told. He had spent the last couple of days hiding in his tent. At least here, the world made sense. The whole thing was insane. 2022 years. Gone. How was he supposed to believe that? His family, all dead. It made his heart heavy. Suddenly, there was a noise outside. He grabbed his sword and followed his ears. They lead him to the center of the camp. 2 soldiers were arguing. One of them was a blonde man with green eyes, while the other was a black-haired woman with brown eyes. The tribune had given him a device which translated the other languages in the camp to Latin. It had taken him 2 days to figure the odd machine out, but now he knew how to operate it. He shook his head. It's like something from the myths, made by the gods themselves. They were standing next to a large weapon. The weapon itself stood next to a large ring. Anders had called it an astroporta, a gate to the stars. "The schedule says that you were to clean it, Decurion," the man was saying. "There was a problem in the caves. They needed my help. I simply did not get around to cleaning the weapon." "No excuses, I want." Marcus cleared his throat and gave the 2 of them a stern look. "Are you 2 done?" He looked at the female Decurion. "Decurion, clean the weapon." Then he looked at man. "You, help her, and no arguments. These kind of conversations are not good for unit morale, is that clear?" "Yes, sir," the 2 of them said before setting to the task. He made his way back to his tent, pondering what had just happened. 2,000 years and still. He was not a part of their army, so they did not have to obey his orders. But they had, so maybe, just maybe, there was a place for him in this world. 3 getting started. New York City. Apartment building, 7th floor, 15 March 2016. Major Mark Vale stepped into his apartment and put his groceries in the kitchen. For nearly 5 years, Marcus Valerius had spent his time catching up to the modern world. He had begun by learning to read and write English. Then he had spent a lot of time updating his military training and his knowledge of history. But in his mind, his greatest achievement was learning to fly. Much to his own amazement, he had turned out to be a natural talent. He had begun flying small propeller planes, but had quickly advanced to bigger models. And even fighter jets, including the F-302 space fighter. It was this skill that led him away from the Beta Site and the Stargate program. In July of 2015, he had been put on loan to the Air National Guard and the 103rd Rescue Squadron. His job was to fly the squadron's HC-130 Hercules transport aircraft. But his training had included parachuting out of the plane. The first time he had done it, Mark had considered it insane. But now he considered one of the most normal things in the world. He was unpacking his groceries when the bell rang. Mark frowned and went to open the door. It was somebody he never expected to see standing on his doorstep. Mr. President, the President of the United States of America, was standing outside his door. To Mark, it was like having the Emperor of Rome coming to see you in person. In the old days, there was a good chance of you being dead when he left. What brings you to my humble home? He stepped aside to let the man inside. A job offer, Major. The president stepped inside. His name was Robert Mackenzie. His predecessor had been called Henry Hayes. Hayes had become president in 2004 with a man called Robert Kinsey as his vice president. Shortly after, Kinsey had resigned. Mackenzie had been picked to take over the position. It was at that point that Mackenzie learned about the Stargate program, and he had become a solid supporter of it. He had also helped Hayes land re-election in 2008. In 2012, after 8 years as vice president, Mackenzie had landed in the hot seat himself. At the moment, he was busy running for re-election, which was another reason Vale had not expected him. "Will you have a seat, sir?" Mark said, while gesturing towards his small living room. "Thank you, Major." Vale followed Mackenzie, closing the door and locking it. Mackenzie was 55 years old, with green eyes and black hair. He was fit and had a sharp mind. Before entering the world of politics at the age of 35, he had served in the U.S. Navy. He had enlisted at the age of 17. Between these two careers, he had made a lot of friends, and it was very likely for him to get re-elected. But none of that was on Vale's mind as the president sat on his couch. "Can I get you anything, sir? Got any cold beer? It's been one of those days." "Yes, sir." Vale walked into the kitchen and quickly grabbed 2 beers from the fridge and 2 clean glasses from one of the cabinets above the sink. Then he made his way back to the living room. He sat down in a chair across from the president while opening the beers. He put the glasses down and filled the president's glass. "So, what kind of job are we talking about here, sir?" "A command." Mackenzie sipped his beer. "We've figured out how to dial the 9th chevron, Major." "Why do I have a feeling there's a but coming, sir?" "That's one of the reasons why I want you for this job, Major," Mackenzie began. "You're sharp. And there is indeed a but, Major. Have you ever heard of P2X110? Vale nodded no. He had never heard about this planet. It's a planet that used to be on the border between Ra and Apophis territories. And they both wanted it, resulting in multiple battles. I believe it was nicknamed Yo-Yo Prime because it kept going back and forth between the 2 system lords. It clicked in Mark's head. I heard about Yo-Yo Prime. It was the planet surrounded by a massive debris field, but I never heard where the field came from. I presume the debris was caused by the battles, sir. So what happened after the Gold Empire fell, sir? Who lives there now? Nobody. Mackenzie leaned back. Which is why we moved the beta site over there and began using the debris to build a power source capable of dialing the 9th chevron. We finished it 3 days ago and are now running tests. The problem is that there are some who have reservations. Mackenzie took another sip of beer. And that they might be right. This project is experimental and uses alien technology. Our best scientists, including Dr. Aronov and Mr. Colson, estimated there's a 20% chance the whole thing might literally blow up on us. We need a plan B, and that's where you come in. Mackenzie reached into his chest pocket and took out a folded piece of paper, which he gave to Vale. Mark opened it to find a schematic of an ancient tower. Is this the ancient tower they found me in? No, we're calling it Nova Roma, Mackenzie said. After you left, we discovered why these Atlantis prototypes never made it into the final product. The metal doesn't age well. It has become extremely brittle. One touch and it falls apart, which is why the ancients introduced the nanites. Eventually, the ancients decided the nanites were too difficult to program. So they figured out how to make a material that didn't need them. But we can't make this material. No, but it turned out the nanites could, so we merged all the towers together. The result is Nova Roma, a tower-sized escape pod. Mackenzie paused. Before we start dialing, we'll evacuate all non-essential personnel to Nova Roma. Only Colonel Telford and his team will remain. Colonel David Telford had been the planned commander of Destiny a long time ago. But things had not gone as planned. And I want you to be in command of the tower. I'm still not entirely clear why you picked me, sir, Vale began. And what about Major Anders or Captain Haley? Klaus Anders has recently been promoted to full bird colonel. He's been reassigned to command of deep space carrier construction. Major Haley has been reassigned to Nellis Air Force Base. She's assigned to the development of the X-305. Mackenzie paused. So, are you on board? Yes, sir, but I still do not know why you want me in command. Because you skipped over 2,000 years of civilization and history without going insane. A command in the Stargate program takes a special breed of leader, and a hop like that proves to me that you are a leader like that. Mackenzie stood up, as did Vale. He took out another piece of paper, which he also handed to Vale. These are the details, and show up in dress uniform, Lieutenant Colonel. We'll have to do the promotion ceremony to make it official. Mark opened the front door, but there was still one question on his mind. One last question, sir. Why did you come to ask me in person? I thought one of the perks of being the president was that you had people to this sort of thing for you. True, but I was in town for a whole list of meetings. I needed a break, Mackenzie said. Thank you for the beer. You're welcome, sir. Mackenzie walked out and Vale closed the door behind him. He had a lot of work to do, but he had no intention of doing so on an empty stomach. So he went into the kitchen and set about making dinner. P2X110/Beta Site Power Generation, Room 21, March 2016. 0639 hours. Vale had done his homework, so he already knew what the beta site looked like, but it was nevertheless an impressive sight. The George Hammond, one of Earth's warships, had just teleported him down to the surface. There were 8 gold hyperdrive cores connected to a control section. The power conduits were laced with naquata. This element was the material the Stargates were made of. It increased the power as it moved down the line. This was also the reason Nova Roma existed. If something went wrong, the naquata could grow unstable and explode with enough of a bang to wipe the base and anything within 175 kilometers off the map. And that was presuming the Stargate itself didn't detonate as well. If it did, the explosion would be many times more massive. Which was why Nova Roma was placed on the far side of the planet. As he studied the power room, he noticed Colonel Telford approaching. Colonel Telford. Colonel Vale. Very impressive place you've got here. Vale gestured towards the installation. I can see why they put Nova Roma so far away. This really is a powerhouse. How much power do you have to play with? We're not entirely sure, but at least 85 gold hyperdrive cores worth. Telford paused. We've already dialed the Pegasus Galaxy twice, so the range is good enough for intergalactic dialing. The door to the room opened, and Major Jennifer Haley walked in. She was here to take a closer look at Nova Roma, hoping to learn things that could be put into the X-305. Seconds later, she was followed by Nikita Aronov and Alec Colson. Aronov and Colson were the 2 ranking scientists for Nova Roma. Colson and Haley were discussing what appeared to be a rough outline of the X-305. The 305 was nowhere near construction ready, but the first drawings were already being made. Aronov was reading a book while eating a sandwich. When they got close, Haley closed the folder. She and Colson turned their attention to the colonels. Colonels, Haley said with a salute. Mark, Colonel Telford, Colson said. Alec Major, Vale said. Telford simply gave the two of them a nod in reply. It was only then that Aronov realized what was going on. He quickly put away his book and finished his sandwich. This is not the mess hall. No, it's not, Vale began with a snicker. So, everybody ready to get this show on the road? The technicians are running the final diagnostics now, Telford began. Base evac will begin in 20 minutes, people, so make sure all your essential gear is packed and everything else is secured. Get to it. Yes, sir, Haley said. Haley left, followed by Colson and Aronov. Vale and Telford also walked out of the room. Mark gave Telford a nod and ran to catch up with Aronov. Nikita, got a minute? Sure, what's up? Not here, Vale said. We need someplace private. Your office should do. Aronov nodded and led the way. Beta Site, Aronov's office, 21 March 2016. 0645 hours. On any other day, Aronov's office would have been a mess. The place was home to a large collection of books and artifacts. There were also several maps mounted on the walls, but except for the maps, all of that was tucked out of view now. Nikita sat at the side of his desk which the computer faced, while Mark sat across from him. So, what's bothering you, boss? They've been testing the power source for 9 days now, Vale began. I've read your reports on this rodeo, but that report is now 9 days old, so I was wondering if you wanted to add something. Look, I'm no engineer, Aronov took a deep breath. But I do know that go-old math is a pain to translate. As are instructions manuals, all it takes is 1 decimal in the wrong place and it all goes off the rails. And Alec is an engineer, a very good one, as we both know. He paused. Without him, there is no way we could have completed Nova Roma. I trust his judgment, boss. So do I. Was there anything off during the tests? Anything that didn't make it into the official paperwork? No, Aronov began. Telford was on top of any trouble. Okay, let's run through the plan one last time. Aronov nodded, and they got to work. For departure. Nova Roma Control Room, 21 March 2016. 0700. The evacuation had begun on schedule. Mark was in the control room, watching as a group of people materialized on what they had named the arrival platform. Said platform, a round slab of metal at the bottom of a flight of stairs. The control room was at the top of those stairs. It was a pentagon-shaped room with controls panels that allowed them to run the entire tower. There had not been enough ancient consoles for the job, so the place was a hybrid of ancient, human, and go-old controls. But the crown jewel of the base was in the middle of the room, an interface in the form of a special chair allowing the tower to be flown. Nova Roma could not fly faster than light, but she did have excellent sublight drives. If things went wrong on the other side of the planet, the plan was to use those drives to get Nova Roma to safety. Then, they would signal the George Hammond for evacuation back to Earth. Colson, Haley, and Aronov were amongst those manning the consoles. Vale would sit in the chair. For now, however, he was looking over Colson's shoulder. Alec was operating Nova Roma's Asgard transporter, which was how they were emptying the beta site. He nodded and left the man to it. Micromanaging was not this thing. Sir, one of the other people manning the consoles said, our VIPs have arrived. Captain Carl Grogan had served on SG-9 and later on SG-24. Vale had recruited him from there to seed several more experienced people in his very green security detail. He had quickly proved himself and been put in command of his own team 2 weeks ago. His team also included Sergeant Dusty Mera, a female veteran from Atlantis, and she was not the only lady he had drafted from Atlantis. Nova Roma's security branch was led by Major Ann Teldy. Also recruited from there was Dr. Allison Porter. She was the second in command of the science department. Haley had offered her the leadership of the department, but she had turned it down. Mark made a mental note to ask her about why she had done so later, But for now, he had other things to worry about. He turned to Grogan. "Give the Hammond the green light to beam them down." There was a flash, and President Mackenzie and General O'Neill appeared on the arrival platform. They were both wearing military fatigues. Mackenzie saw the room and whistled. The military personnel snapped to attention. "At ease," Mackenzie began as the two of them walked towards the control room. "I like it. It's like Atlantis, but it isn't at the same time. It could use a Stargate, though." He gestured towards the far wall. "It feels incomplete." Alas, there was only one gate to go around. O'Neill said as they reached the top of the stairs. "Colonel Vale." "Mr. President General, welcome to Nova Roma." "So, how are things going?" Mackenzie said. "We're on schedule. The base will be empty at 0715 hours. We can dial 5 minutes after that, sir." "Good," Mackenzie began. "That gives me 10 minutes to take a closer look at this impossible chair." He sat down in the flight control chair. Or, as Mark was calling it, the hot seat. Vale and O'Neill exchanged looks, but didn't object. Mackenzie gave Vale a nod, and the colonel began explaining the workings of the hot seat. The president listened intently as Vale did so. After he finished, Mackenzie hit several buttons. A screen showing a panorama of the sky above the tower lowered. "It's amazing," he said. "And this chair is a mix of Goa'uld, ancient, Asgard, and Tory technology." "Yes, sir," Vale said. "But I'm surprised you're calling it Tory technology, sir, and not American technology, sir." "This chair was built using American ideas, Russian ideas, Chinese ideas, and a whole bunch of stuff we retro-engineered from alien gear. The American label just doesn't fit anymore, Colonel. This chair is humanity's work." He paused. "Sorry, I sometimes get a bit poetical." "I get that way myself sometimes, sir," Vale said with a chuckle. "How does she handle?" "We've only taken her up twice to make sure the sublights work properly. We didn't take her out of the atmosphere, but she handled like a dream. And if the math is right, she can clear the atmosphere in 20 seconds. "Sirs," Grogan began, "the beta site is empty, and we are ready to begin running diagnostics, sirs." "Then I'll get out of this chair and let you get to it." Mackenzie raised the screen and stood up. "It's all yours, Colonel." Vale took the chair, and they set to work. "Beta Site Gate, Room 21, March 2016, 0720. Colonel David Telford stood in the gate room and looked at the Stargate. Even after all these years, the ancient device still impressed him. He turned around and gave the technician who was here to operate the gate a nod. She was one of 5 people besides his 16-member team who were still here. The other 4 were guards outside the gate room. There was a pause, and then the Stargate began to move. A low hum, which was slowly growing louder, indicated that the device was now drawing power. 30% of potential and increasing, she said. Stability, 95% and holding. The power continued to increase. It ticked past 40%, then 50, 60, and 70. But when they reached 75% of potential, the stability indicator began to fall rapidly. For every percent more power, they lost 5% stability. By the time they got to 90% power, the stability dial was down to 20%. Telford rushed to a nearby console and increased the cooling of the power source to maximum. The stability dial only climbed 5%. Telford cursed and moved to a panel with levers, which controlled a series of emergency vents. He opened all of them halfway. "Stability at 30% and holding," the technician said. "Power at 99.97% of potential, sir." Telford looked at the Stargate. It was still dialing. He opened the emergency vents all the way, and the stability increased to 35%. They were balancing right on the edge here. The gate had locked the 8th chevron and was now dialing the last one. Telford held his breath. This was the moment of truth. After what felt like forever, the 9th chevron locked and the wormhole formed. Wormhole established. Stability at 40%. The technician said. Disconnect in 52 seconds. Move, people. The team made its way through the event horizon of the wormhole. Telford grabbed his backpack with equipment and ran towards the gate. As he got there, the last member of the team went through. They were down to 10 seconds. Telford gave the gate room one last look, then stepped through himself. 5 seconds later, the gate switched off.